Good evening, and welcome to Doctorpiece Theater. My name is Dr. Dennis Business, and tonight we will continue our journey into the depths of hell. We will continue to meet those that are damned and shall be damned for eternity. That is where we begin today. Before we go any deeper into hell, I'd like to take a second and explain where we've been. Last time we started with Canto VII. That's Circle 4 and Circle 5. Circle 4 is the hoarders and the wasters. Circle 5 is the wrathful and the sullen. The fourth circle is greed. This section of hell is reserved for the money grubbers and overly materialistic among us. According to Dante, those condemned to the fourth circle spend eternity fighting over money and valuables. So be prepared to meet all of your distant cousins who show up out of nowhere with empty U-Haul trucks moments after a well-to-do great aunt or uncle dies. The fifth circle, anger. Dante tells us that the wrathful and angry souls of this circle spend eternity waging battle on the river of Styx. If playing pirates forever sounds like your idea of a good time, then the fifth circle can't be too bad. Be prepared to hoist the Jolly Roger and go to war against that one guy in line who yelled at your favorite barista, and the road rage-possessed driver who very nearly rear-ended you last week. When we get to Canto IX, we enter the sixth circle. That's heresy. Dante wrote that heretics spend eternity entombed in flaming crypts in the sixth circle, but heresy is kind of an obscure sin in modern times. There's probably plenty of vacancies now, so let's fill this one with anyone who goes bananas whenever their movie franchise or comic book changes in a way they don't like. The air in the sixth circle is probably choked with ashes and anguished cries of X ruined my childhood. So far, that's where we've been. The floors in hell do not correspond to the canto numbers. So Canto 6, 7, and 8 aren't levels 6, 7, and 8. Like Circle 6 is 2.5 cantos because it's the heretics. I'm not exactly sure who we are going to meet from here on in. But as we go deeper, the people are going to get worse. You know, greed and heresy are pretty common sins. But when you go lower, the sins they're not so commonplace. Like you have to be somebody special to be down there at the bottom. Well, let's see who's down there. The poets reach the inner edge of the sixth circle and find a great jumble of rocks that had once been a cliff, but which has fallen into rubble as the result of the great earthquake that shook hell when Christ died. Below them lies the seventh circle, and so fetid is the air that arises from it that the poets cower for shelter behind a great tomb until their breaths can grow accustomed to the stench. Dante finds an inscription on the lid of the tomb labeling it as the place in hell of Pope Anastasius. Virgil takes advantage of the delay to outline in detail the division of the lower hell, a theological discourse based on the ethics and the physics of Aristotle with subsequent medieval interpretations. Virgil also explains why it is that the incontinent are not punished within the walls of Dis, and rather ingeniously sets forth the reasons why usury is an act of violence against art, which is the child of nature and hence the grandchild of God. By art, Dante means the arts and crafts by which man draws from nature, industry. As he concludes, he rises and urges Dante on, by means known only to Virgil. He is aware of the motion of the stars, and from them he sees that it is about 2 hours before sunrise of Holy Saturday. We came to the edge of an enormous sink, rimmed by a circle of great broken boulders. Here we found ghastlier gangs, and here the stink thrown up by the abyss so overpowered us that we drew back, cowering behind the wall of one of the great tombs. And standing thus, I saw an inscription in the stone, and read, I guard Anastasius, once Pope, he who Fontanus led from the straight road. Before we travel on to that blind pit, we must delay until our sense grows used to its foul breath, and then we will not mind it, my master said. And I then, let us find some compensation for the time of waiting. And he, you shall see, I have just that in mind. My son, he began, there are below this wall 3 smaller circles, each in its degree like those you are about to leave, and all are crammed with gods accursed. Accordingly, that you may understand their sins at sight, I will explain how each is poisoned and why. Malice is the sin most hated by God, and the aim of malice is to injure others, whether by fraud or violence. But since fraud is the vice of which man alone is capable, God loathes it most. Therefore, the fraudulent are placed below, and their torment is more painful. The first below are the violent, but as violence sins in 3 persons, so that circle is formed of 3 descending rounds of crueler torments. Against God, self, and neighbor is violence shown. Against their persons and their goods, I say, as you shall hear set forth with open reason. Murder and mayhem are the violation of the person of one's neighbor, and of his goods, harassment, plunder, arson, and extortion. Therefore, homicides, and those who strike in malice, destroyers and plunderers, all lie in that first round, and like suffers with like. A man may lay violent hands upon his own person and substance. So in that second round eternally in vain repentance moan the suicides, and all who gamble away and waste the good and substance of their lives, and weep in that sweet time when they should be happy. Violence may be offered the deity in the heart that blasphemes and refuses him and scorns the gifts of nature, her beauty and bounty. Therefore, the smallest round brands with his mark both Sodom and Cahors, and all who rail at God and his commands in their dark hearts. Fraud, which is a canker to every conscience, may be practiced by a man on those who trust him, and on those who have reposed no confidence. The latter mode seems only to deny the bond of love, which all men have for nature. Therefore, within the second circle lie simoniacs, sycophants and hypocrites, falsifiers, thieves and sorcerers, grafters, pimps, and all such filthy cheats. The former mode of fraud not only denies the bonds of nature, but the special trust added by bonds of friendship or blood ties. Hence, at the center point of all creation in the smallest circle on which Dis is founded, the traitors lie in endless expiation. Master, I said, the clarity of your mind impresses all you touch. I see quite clearly the orders of this dark pit of the blind. But tell me, those who lie in the swamp's bowels, those the winds blow about, those the rain beats, and those who meet and clash with such mad howls, why are they not punished in the rust-red city if God's wrath be upon them? And if it is not, why must they grieve through all eternity? And he, why does your understanding stray so far from its own habit? Or can it be your thoughts are turned along some other way? Have you forgotten that your ethics states the three main dispositions of the soul that lead to those offenses heaven hates? Incontinence, malice, and bestiality? And how incontinence offends God least and earns least blame from justice and charity? Now, if you weigh this doctrine and recall exactly who they are whose punishment lies in that upper hell outside the wall, you will understand at once why they are confined apart from these fierce wraiths, and why less anger beats down on them from the eternal mind. O sun which clears all mist from troubled sight, such joy attends your rising that I feel as grateful to the dark as to the light. Go back a little further, I said, to where you spoke of usury as an offense against God's goodness. How is that made clear? Philosophy makes plain by many reasons, he answered me. To those who heed her teachings, how all of nature, her laws, her fruits, her seasons, springs from the ultimate intellect and its art. And if you read your physics with due care, you will note, not many pages from the start, that art strives after her by imitation, as the disciple imitates the master. Art, as it were, is the grandchild of creation. By this, recalling Old Testament near the beginning of Genesis, you will see that in the will of providence, man was meant to labor and to prosper, but usurers, by seeking their increase in other ways, scorn nature in herself and her followers. But come, for it is my wish now to go on. The wheel turns and the wain lies over Charis. The fish are quivering low on the horizon, and there beyond us runs the road we go down, the dark scarp into the depths below. The seventh circle. Violence. The outer ring of the seventh circle is filled with blood and fire, and is reserved for murderers and thugs. The middle ring is where, according to Dante, suicide victims go. They're transformed into trees and fed upon by harpies, like big, huge termites. The inner ring, a place of burning sand, is reserved for sodomites and blasphemers. The poets begin the descent of the fallen rock wall, having first to evade the Minotaur who menaces them. Virgil tricks him, and the poets hurry by. Below them, they see the river of blood, which marks the first round of the seventh circle, as detailed in the previous canto. Here are punished the violent against their neighbors, the great war makers, cruel tyrants, highwaymen, all who shed the blood of their fellow man. As they wallowed in blood during their lives, so they are immersed in the boiling blood forever, each according to the degree of his guilt, while fierce centaurs patrol the banks, ready to shoot with their arrows any sinner who raises himself out of the boiling blood beyond the limits permitted him. Alexander the Great is here, up to his lashes in blood, and with him, Attila, the scourge of God. They are immersed in the deepest part of the river, which grows shallower as it circles to the other side of the ledge, and then it deepens again. The poets are challenged by the centaurs, but Virgil wins a safe conduct from Chiron, their chief, who assigns Nicias to guide them and bear them across the shallows of the boiling blood. Nicias carries them across at the point where it is only ankle deep and immediately leaves them and returns to his patrol. The scene that opened up from the edge of the pit was mountainous, and such a desolation that every eye would shun the light of it. A ruin like the slides of Mark near Trent, on the bank of the Adige, the result of an earthquake or of some massive fault in the escarpment. For, from one point on the peak, where the mountains split to the plain below, the rock is so badly shattered, a man at the top might make a rough stair of it. Such was the passage down the steep, and there, at the very top, at the edge of the broken cleft, lay spread the infamy of Crete, the heir of bestiality, and the lecherous queen who hid in a wooden cow. And when he saw us, he gnawed off his own flesh in a fit of spleen. And my master mocked him. How do you pump your... And my master mocked in 3. And my master mocked. How do you pump your breath? Do you think, perhaps, it is the Duke of Athens who in the world above served you your death? Off with you, monster! This one does not come instructed by your sister, but of himself, to observe your punishment in the lost kingdom. As a bull that breaks its chains just when the knife has struck its death blow, cannot stand nor run but leaps from side to side with its last life, so danced the Minotaur, and my shrewd guide cried out, Run now, while he is blind with rage, into the pass, quick! Get over the side! So we went down across the shale and slay to that ruined rock, which often slid and shifted under me at the touch of living weight. I moved on, deep in thought, and my guide to me, You are wondering, perhaps, about this ruin, which is guarded by that beast upon whose fury I played just now. I should tell you that when last I came this way to the dark depths of hell, this rock had not felt the ruinous blast. But certainly, if I am not mistaken, it was just before the coming of him who took the souls from limbo, that all hell was shaken, so that I thought the universe felt love, and all its elements moved towards harmony, whereby the world of matter, as some believe, has often plunged into chaos. It was then that here and elsewhere in the pits of hell, the ancient rock was stricken and broke open. But turn your eyes to the valley. There we shall find the river of boiling blood, in which are steeped all who struck down their fellow man. O blind, O ignorant, self-seeking cupidity which spurs us on in the short mortal life and steeps us so through all eternity. I saw an arching fosse that was the bed of a winding river circling through the plain exactly how my guide and lord had said. A file of centaurs galloped in the space between the bank and the cliff, well armed with arrows, riding as once on earth they rode to the chase. And seeing us descend, that straggling band halted, and 3 of them moved out towards us, their long bows and their shafts ready in hand. And one of them cried out while still below, To what pain are you sent down that dark coast? Answer from where you stand, or I draw the bow. Chiron is standing there by your side. Our answer will be to him, This wrath of yours was always your own worst fate. My guide replied, and he to me, That is Nicias, who died in the wood for insulting Jezerana. At his death, he plotted his revenge in his own blood. The one in the middle staring at his chest is the mighty Chiron, who nursed Achilles, the other is Phlois, fiercer than the rest. They run by that stream in thousands, snapping their bows at any wraith who dares to raise himself out of the blood more than his guilt allows. We drew near those swift beasts. In a thoughtful pause, Chiron drew an arrow, and with its notch he pushed his great beard backwards along his jaws. And when he had thus uncovered the huge pouches on his lips, he said to his fellows, "Have you noticed the one who walks behind him moves what he touches? That is not how the dead go." My good guide, already standing by the mountainous beast in which the two mixed natures joined, replied, "It is true he lives. In his necessity, I alone must lead him through this valley. Fate brings him here, not curiosity. From singing Alleluia, the sublime spirit who sends me came. He is no bandit, nor am I who ever stooped to a crime. But in the name of the power by which I go this sunken way across the floor of hell, assign us one of your troop whom we may follow, that he may guide us to the ford, and there carry on his back the one I lead, for he is not a spirit to move through air." Chiron turned his head on his right breast and said to Nicias, "Go with them and guide them, and turn back any others that would contest their passage." So we moved beside our guide along the banks of the scalding purple river, in which the shrieking wraiths were boiled and dyed. Some stood up to their lashes in that torrent, and as we passed them, the huge centaur said, "Those were the kings of bloodshed and despoilment. Here they pay for their ferocity. Here is Alexander and Dionysus, who brought long years of grief to Sicily. That brow you see with the hair as black as night is Alonzino, and that beside him, the blonde, is Opisidaesti, who had his mortal light blown out by his own stepson." I turned, then, to speak to the poet, but he raised a hand. "Let him be the teacher now, and I will listen." Further on, the centaur stalked beside a group of spirits, steeped as far as the throat in the race of boiling blood, and there our guide pointed out a sinner who stood alone. "That one before God's altar pierced a heart that still honored on the Thames." And he passed on. We came in sight of some who were allowed to raise the head and all the chest from the river, and I recognized many there. Thus, as we followed along the stream of blood, its level fell until it cooked no more than the feet of the damned. And here we crossed the ford to deeper hell. "Just as you see the boiling stream grow shallow along this side," the centaur said to us when we stood on the other bank, "I would have you know that on the other the bottom sinks anew more and more, until it comes again full circle to the place where tyrants stew. It is there that the holy justice spends its wrath on Sextus and Furius through eternity, and on Attila, who was a scourge on earth, and everlastingly milks out the tears of two assassins, who for many years stalked the highways bloody and abhorred." And with that, he started back across the fjord. Nessus carries the poets across the river of boiling blood and leaves them in the second round of the seventh circle, the wood of the suicides. Here are punished those who destroyed their own lives and those who destroyed their substance. The souls of the suicides are encased in thorny trees whose leaves are eaten by the odious harpies, the overseers of these damned souls. When the harpies feed upon them, damaging their leaves and limbs, the wounds bleed. Only as long as the blood flows are the souls of the trees able to speak. Thus, they who destroyed their own bodies are denied a human form. And just as the supreme expression of their lives was self-destruction, so they are permitted to speak only through that which tears and destroys them. Only through their own blood do they find voice. And to add one more dimension to the symbolism, it is the harpies, defilers of all they touch, who give them their eternally recurring wounds. The poets pause before one tree and speak with the soul of Pier della Vigne. In the same wood, they see Giacomo de Sant'Andrea and Lano de Segna, two famous squanderers and destroyers of goods, pursued by a pack of savage hounds. The hounds overtake Sant'Andrea, tear him to pieces, and go off carrying his limbs in their teeth, a self-evident symbolic retribution for the violence with which these sinners destroyed their substance in the world. After this scene of horror, Dante speaks to an unknown Florentine suicide, whose soul is inside the bush which was torn by the hound pack when it leaped upon Sant'Andrea. Nisus had not yet reached the other shore when we moved on into a pathless wood that twisted upward from hell's broken floor. Its foliage was not verdant, but nearly black. The unhealthy branches, gnarled and warped and tangled, bore poison thorns instead of fruit. The track of those wild beasts that shun the open spaces till between Cesena and Corneto runs through no rougher, no more tangled places. Here nest the odious harpies of whom my master wrote how they drove Aeneas and his companions from the Strophides with prophecies of disaster. Their wings are wide, their feet clawed, and their huge bellies covered with feathers, their necks and faces human. They croak eternally in the unnatural trees. Before going on, I would have you understand, my guide began. We are in the second round, and shall be till we reach the burning sand. Therefore, look carefully, and you will see things in this wood which, if I told them to you, would shake the confidence you have placed in me. I heard cries of lamentation rise and spill on every hand, but saw no souls in pain in all that waste, and, puzzled, I stood still. Puzzled, I raised my hand a bit and slowly broke off a branchlet from an enormous thorn, and the great trunk of it cried, "Why do you break me?" After blood had darkened all the bowl of the wound, it cried again, "Why do you tear me? Is there no pity left in any soul? Men we were, and now are changed to sticks. Well might your hand have been more merciful, where we were no more than souls of lice and ticks." As a green branch, with one end all aflame, will hiss and sputter sap out of the other as the air escapes, so from that trunk there came words and blood together, gout by gout. Startled, I dropped the branch that I was holding and stood transfixed by fear, half turned about to my master, who replied, "O wounded soul, could he have believed before what he has seen in my verses only, you would yet be whole, for his hand never would have been raised against you. But knowing this truth could never be believed till it was seen, I urged him on to do what grieves me now. And I begged to know your name, that to make some amends in the sweet world when he returns, he may refresh your fame." And the trunk, "So sweet those words to me that I cannot be still, and it may annoy you if I seem somewhat lengthy in reply. I am he who held both keys to Frederick's heart, locking, unlocking with so deft a touch that scarce another soul had any part in his most secret thoughts. Through every strife I was so faithful to my glorious office that for it I gave up both sleep and life. That harlot envy, who on Caesar's face keeps fixed forever her adulterous stare, and the common plague of vice in courts and palace inflamed all minds against me. These so inflamed him, that all my happy honors were changed to mourning. Then, unjustly blamed, my soul, in scorn, and thinking to be free of my scorn in death, made me at last, though unjust to myself. By the new roots of this tree, I swear to you that never in a word or spirit did I break faith to my lord and emperor, who was so worthy of honor in his merit. If either of you return to the world, speak for me, to vindicate in the memory of men one who lies prostrate from the blows of envy. The poet stood, and then turned. Since he is silent, my poet said to me, do not waste this hour if you wish to ask questions about his life or torment. And I replied, question him for my part, on whatever you think I would do well to hear. I could not. Such compassion chokes my heart. The poet began again. That this man may with all his heart do for you what your words entreat to him. Imprisoned spirit, I pray, tell us how the soul is bound and bent into these knots, and whether any ever frees itself from such imprisonment. And at that the trunk blew powerfully, and then the wind became a voice that spoke these words. Briefly is the answer given, when out of the flesh from which it tore itself, the violent spirit comes to punishment. Minos assigns it to the seventh shelf. It falls into the wood, and landing there, wherever fortune flings it, it strikes root, and there it sprouts, lusty as any tear, shoots up a sapling, and becomes a tree. The harpies, feeding on its leaves then, give it pain and pain's outlet simultaneously. Like the rest, we shall go for our husks on Judgment Day, but not that we may wear them, for it is not just that a man be given what he throws away. Here shall we drag them, and in this mournful glade our bodies will dangle till the end of time, each on the thorns of its tormented shade. We waited by the trunk, but it said no more, and waiting we were startled by a noise that grew through all the wood. Just such a roar and the trembling as one feels when the boar in chase approach his stand. The beasts and the branches clashing and clashing in the heat of the fierce race. And there, on the left, running so violently they broke off every twig in the dark wood. Two torn and naked wraiths went plunging by me. The leader cried, Come now, O death! Come now! And the other, seeing that he was outrun, cried out, Your legs were not so ready, Lano, in the jousts at the topo. And suddenly, in his rush, perhaps because his breath was failing him, he hid himself inside of a thorny bush and cowered among its leaves. Then, at his back, the wood leaped with black bitches, swift as greyhounds escaping from their leash, and all the pack sprang on him. With their fangs they opened him, tore him savagely, and then withdrew, carrying his body with them, limb by limb. Then, taking me by the hand across the wood, my master led me towards the bush. Lamenting, all its fractures blew out words and blood. O Giacomo de Sant'Andrea, it said, what have you gained in making me your screen? What part had I in the foul life you led? And when my master had drawn up to it, he said, Who were you? Who through all your wounds blow out your blood with your lament, sad spirit? And he to us, You have come to see how the outrageous manglings of these hounds has torn my boughs and stripped my leaves from me. Oh, heap them around my ruin. I was born in the city that tore down Mars and raised the Baptist. On that account, the god of war has sworn her sorrow shall not end. And it were not that something of his image still survives on that bridge across the Arno. Some have thought those citizens who of their love and pain afterwards rebuilt it from the ashes left by Attila, who would have worked in vain. I am the one who has no tale to tell. I made myself a gibbet of my own lintel. That was Canto 11, 12, and 13 of the Inferno by Dante Alighieri. Hell is a scary place. In these three cantos, if I'm remembering right, we met the suicide trees, which has always been a part I really liked. This circle, I guess, brings up things for me. And, you know, how are you supposed to feel, right? So let's say you have somebody that did that. Maybe have a few. It's difficult to picture them in hell, being sorted by Minos and sent to level 7. They get thrown down there, and wherever they land is where they stay for eternity. And a seedling grows, and then that turns into a tree. And every time the harpies touch anything with their claws, they tear it apart. So the harpies feed on their leaves, and every time they land on a branch, their claws tear it to shreds. And it's difficult, because as much as you would be angry with that person for making the choice they did, it's hard to think that they would suffer forever. It's just, it twists my mind, because as much as you may be angry, you can't turn that anger into revenge, because I don't think that's what hell is for. I don't think it's for vengeance. I think it's just a punishment for not using the information that was at your disposal. And in doing so, that's almost heresy in itself, because of ignoring the words of God. But I think they would put a suicide in the forest before they would stick them with the heretics. Canto 14 is next. And we'll deal with that next time, because this has been Doctorpiece Theater, and my name is Dr. Dennis Business. And as always, my friend,